Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now I'm a bit late with these, and quite frankly at this point I think I'm doing them because of the principle, because I have been making guides for every single meaningful piece of content released in this game, because unfortunately they do not seem to be getting too much traction with the viewers. But be that as it may, we still have a job to do, and job to do I will. So we're going to go through path by path. I'm going to go over every single node combination, recommend some counters or generic idea on how to tackle these lanes, and then we're going to go over the bosses. So we're going to start with this path A that has this buff synthesis, fury, precision, power struggle, and then we have subterfuge block, where every time you block you actually gain a fury. So you can theoretically use any champion in the game to take advantage of this buff synthesis, fury, precision, except like Red Guardian and Spider-Man 2099, because whenever you trigger a precision buff while a fury buff is active, you gain a precision buff. So what you need to do is you need to parry, gain a fury buff, then you need to trigger dex, and you're going to gain a precision buff that's going to give you a substantial attack increase. The only hurdle on this lane is this combat deja vu, and that means every time you do the same basic attack twice in a row, opponents are going to get unblockable buff. So you can play around it with any champion, but my personal recommendation would be to lean on some of the Mystic champions, because you can trigger it on purpose and then nullify it and then feed your Mystic Dispersion. Like with Dr. Doom, I personally had quite a lot of fun with Mojo on here, Black Widow, Clairvoyant, Sorcerer Supreme, whoever. Any Mystic champion that has potent nullification abilities will actually have quite a good time, because any opponent on this lane will be generating buffs at a relatively frequent pace, and as long as you have Mystic Dispersion, you can definitely get some good benefit out of it. When it comes to the opponents, only thing that you need to really be of note is the Spider-Man. It can be quite tricky because he's level 1, can't be dexed, and his web shooter hits will also be unblockable if he's under unblockable buff. So ideally for that one fight you want to bring in some await counter and play around the node. And then we have Hitmonkey, which is kind of similar, where you don't really want to knock them down. Other than that, not much to struggle here. I would personally recommend looking at your Mystic roster and whatever Mystic champions you have in order to benefit from that buff and Mystic Dispersion, or just use whichever champions you are more comfortable with and play around that combat deja vu node. And I think it's quite similar with this lane, where we have Paradox Special, Entropic Prowess, Power Reserve, Quantum, Entangle, and again Combat Deja Vu lane. So because of Power Reserve and these Paradox charges, where you gain one charge every time defender or attacker activates a special attack, but you lose a charge every time you knock down the opponent. So it's kind of special for special. If you activate special attack, you will gain a charge, but you will also lose a charge. If opponent activates special attack, you will gain a charge, but you can knock them down a couple of times by yourself, or you can activate, well, you can just bait out a couple of special attacks from opponent to gain those paradox charges initially. The only thing to be of note here is that the attacker suffers minus 100% defensive ability accuracy initially, so your parries will be disabled until opponent activates 3 special attacks, but because of Power Reserve, that happens quite quickly. And then when you look at the opponents here, most of them are also fairly Mystic opponent friendly, I would say. We have like Visionarchus, we have Kingpin, who has access to buffs, we have Nova and King Groot. And again, on this lane, I would personally recommend kind of leaning on Mystic champions to have greater, faster access to special attacks. And, you know, every time you throw a special attack, you can keep the balance of paradox charges intact, and it's a fairly straightforward lane. You could, in theory, stun lock the opponents, but all of them have been placed there with ability to shrug off the stuns or going stun immune. So stun locking here is not quite an option. But what is an option for this lane 100% is Professor X. Professor X is quite a good shout here because of Power Reserve. Your special attacks will basically cost no power. So as long as you get the 3 paradox charges, you build up to your level 2, the job's done there, basically. You can just nuke them down, infinitely spamming special attacks with Professor X, so that will be a quite fun time there. Or, again, alternatively, play around with Combat Deja Vu and trigger Mystic Dispersion and have a good time. Either or, whichever one you find more enjoyable. Move on to the next lane over here. in the first fight against Red Hulk. Now we have this, whenever a skill attacker is blocked, they have 50% chance to passively stun the defender for 2 seconds, and then it's increased based on your combo meter. We have Galvanized node, which will effectively either have them be unblockable completely, or you will be shocked if you hit their block. Then we have Stun Vulnerability, which is obviously super helpful for you, Schadenfreude, and Node that you can pretty much ignore, and Limber. Now, the way to deal with this fight, for me personally, the best solution here was Kingpin with Hood Synergy, and that's it. You just get shocked on purpose. Opponent is going to get stunned. Your attack's going to increase regardless. You are guaranteed to shrug off that stun. So Kingpin works fantastically. Other than that, we have Mole-Man, who is immune to these shock effects, so he can completely ignore the downside of Galvanize. If anything, he benefits from it, gaining the monster mass there, and still benefits from the, stun, getting easy heavy attacks in, replenishing his charges. We have stun vulnerability, all that other good stuff. And then again, obviously, we can still use champions like Aegon. Once you build up his combo meter, he's going to be able to shrug off those stuns, so you need to be a bit careful initially, and then you can basically forget about the downside of being stunned or Shang-Chi. But yeah, just look at your skill roster. My personal favorite was definitely Kingpin. He did extremely well. Mole-Man is very suitable for this fight as well, or any skill champions really that shrug off debuffs. Alternatively, you can just use any shock immune champion. Opponents will have Limber active, and you will not get the attack benefits. Not really because of the Limber. But only thing you have to do is dealing with opponents being occasionally unblockable. So you need to time when they throw their special attacks and stuff like that. You can use your Silver Surfers or basically, well, any shock immune champions. That being said, let's move on to the next lane. Next lane's number 5. No, next lane's number 4, because this one is the lane that we already took a look at. So let's take a look at this one. This one actually seemed a bit trickier initially against Omega Red, but once you got going, it wasn't too bad. Whenever the attacker knocks the defender down, you gain 1 paradox charge. Last hit of your special attack power burns the defender for 15% of their max power for each paradox on the attacker. And whenever you parry, you lose 1 charge. So ideally, to get started, you want champions that are able to knock down the opponent without relying on parry. So we're looking at champions like Ghost, we're looking at champions like Dr. Doom, we're looking at Wasp, or I don't know, even America Chavez, whatever. But again, in theory, you can use pretty much every champion. Now we have Quantum Power, which is the downside. Whilst opponents are under, whilst you are under 3 paradox charges, they will have significantly increased power rate, which is obviously annoying. But again, that paradox mechanic in general is going to let you deal with opponent's power to begin with. Power Snack, it's similar. It's kind of offset with that paradox node. So it is a bit tricky initially to get those 3 knockdowns. That's why you might want a champion who helps you with that. My personal MVP, like with much of 7.3, was Kingpin here, with Mr. Sinister synergy this time in particular, because every time opponent uses special attack, they end up getting power locked, so I didn't have to worry as much about Power Snack and this Quantum Power. And then on top of that, obviously, when you manage to corner the opponent, Kingpin has the unstoppable buffs whilst you charge heavy attack. And yes, you're going to get hit like once, but you can knock down the opponent relatively easily as well. But again, Ghost, Dr. Doom, Kingpin, Wasp, who Hyperion will do well here as well. Basically, champions that can knock down the opponent without having to parry them, which can be any champion, as long as you like throw 3 level 1s and never parry, but that makes it harder to start. So if you want some extra help, yeah, use the champions that have those unstoppables, phases, or some other alternative ways to find openings without parry. Other than that, first fight Omega is quite annoying. Rest of the fights there were relatively straightforward. And again, this America Chavez seems to be one of the more annoying opponents that I have heard people complain about, especially in this quest. For me, my personal answer definitely was Kingpin, because she activates her first special one, You can power lock her, and then if you have built up your paradox charges, you can make sure that she basically never throws another special attack again by consistently power draining her with your special one. And let's move on to the next one then. The next lane is the one that I recommended for completion lane, and that has an absolutely amazing OG torches. Now, actually, even unduped OG Tor will work really, really well for this lane, because you will not get the armor breaks, but you will still have all the interactions with Crazy Furies. It will take a bit longer, obviously, you will not have as much damage, but even an unduped OG Tor works for this. You can also use champions like Gamora, and even eventually you can play with somebody like Angela, because the Shake and Bake node will place these passive concussions on you, where you have your ability accuracy reduced by 20%. And then, because of that, Angela will not trigger her buffs, for instance, whenever she crits, if this node goes in effect, and you still gain extra Furies as well. So, all in all, buffed up. So, again, you need to have a champion that has 3 buffs. But because of this Impatience node, a lot of Cosmic Champions will get there easier and faster. And whenever the attacker's buffs are nullified or expire or fail to trigger due to reduced ability accuracy, the defender gains a passive prowess. You know, it's passive prowess. I think there is not a single champion whose special attack you can't dex. So passive prowess doesn't really do anything. So my recommendations is, yeah, Hardy, OG Tor, or then we have Black Bolt with Hitmonkey synergy. Then we have Gamora, or just any champion with plenty of buffs also will work just quite fine. Just not as fast, not as potent. Right, and then we have the next one here, which is arguably the easiest lane if you don't have OG Tor, which is this Pleasure to Burn. Right back at it, got a light, Redouble Determination, Incinerate Vulnerability. Now there are 4 or 5 lanes like this. We have the Shock lane that functions identical, we have Poison lane that functions identical, so far and so forth. And for all of them, you just want to use a champion that doesn't generically debuff the opponent and doesn't really need to knock them down, and that is about it. You can bring in Aegon for this lane, you can bring in Corvus probably for this lane, you can bring in I don't know, Ghost or Hyperion, or any champion that has good amount of damage without debuffing the opponent heavily, overloading Redouble Determination. Or alternatively, also Human Torch is obviously very Incinerate heavy champion that's going to be doing well for specifically several of the matchups here against Black Widow Clairvoyant, against Darkhawk, and against Yellow Jacket, because all of them have energy attacks or are Mystic champions. So Human Torch is definitely also a worthwhile addition to this lane. And with that, I think we have covered all the lanes. All the lanes, maybe except this one. No, I started with this one. So we have went over all the 6 paths. Now we have to take a look at the 3 bosses. Now we can start with the most straightforward one, and that is this iHulk. iHulk actually only has one node that matters, really, is the energy, high energy diet, where you need to avoid champions that do energy damage, and that is it. The rest of the nodes, ebb and flow heavy. You can parry and heavy freely in this matchup. Opponents are unstoppable or unblockable, so that is not a problem. So any champion can work with this node, so you can use whoever you want. And then we have this Do Not Go Gentle, and you can completely ignore this node. Do not try to reduce the amount of charges. It's just, you're going to get knocked out when Immortal Hulk is going to be like 1% health. And then you go back in and, you know, you hit him once and the fight's done. So with that, what are the best counters overall? Those are damage and damage over time effect heavy champions, because iHulk doesn't gain gamma, not much anyways, from damage over time effects. So if you deal a large portion of your damage as a bleed, as a poison, as a rapture or something like that, then he's not really going to gain gamma, and he's not even going to go immortal. If you use Nick Fury, for instance, or Mole Man, there's a very high likelihood that he is not even going to gain his immortality. And moving on to Cosmic Ghost Rider boss, and he might sound complicated, but he's fairly straightforward. Only thing that really kind of matters here is the Energize thing, and the fact that he can go unblockable. But because of Energize, that unblockable doesn't even matter as much, as long as you can evade level 1. As long as you can evade level 1, any champion can work here. Now, there's Special Burst Lockdown, so if you're running Suicide Masteries, you're going to want to have a double immune champion or a champion that can shrug off debuffs. Otherwise, the Suicide Masteries are going to basically trickle you down because you're going to have this heal block on you most of the time. You can use Magneto, or you can use, again, Kingpin. Kingpin with Mr. Sinister synergy works wonderful here as well because you can power lock him and then you can be very aggressive, and even though he's going to be unblockable large portion of the time, you can still spam your heavy attacks and stuff like that. But in general, this node does not need this specific counter. Like, it's fairly straightforward. Next up, we have Old Man Logan, which is an annoying fight, but that luckily, again, is very open. In theory, again, any single champion in this game that you want to use, you can here. There's Bubble Shield, so every 10 hits on the block, he's going to go unblockable for 1 hit, and he's going to hit harder in the block. And there is Lionheart, so you don't want to be reversing his regeneration, but that doesn't really matter. Then we have Arrogance, which is the only node that actively interferes in the fight, which means every 10 hits on your combo meter, you will be inflicted a Falter passive. But you can work around it because it's completely predictable. So every 2 full combos, you're going to get Falter passive. Or if you want to keep it easier, if you don't want to worry about Falter, just bring in a champion that counters miss. So if you have Professor Rex, or if you have, I don't know, Daredevil Hell's Kitchen, or whichever, Silver Surfer for all I care. If you can bypass miss, that's it, you're done. You don't have anything to worry. It's a regular Old Man Logan fight that's quite healthy. Now, he has Lazarus, so it's very, very beneficial that you don't lose your combo. Because if you do, it's going to gain more of these charges and you're just going to be extending the fight longer and longer and longer. But because he is a fairly large health pool opponent, if you do not mess up, this Lazarus node barely takes an effect. And if you want to directly be countering Lazarus and make sure that you don't have to kind of like fight longer, then you can, you know, use heal block or champion with a lot of debuffs and despair mastery. But vast majority of the champions here can be used. Bypassing miss is the easiest kind of like quality of life fight improvement here, that you're going to have less things to worry about. And if you can bypass miss, just don't lose your combo and he's going to go down quickly enough. It's just Old Man Logan. So all 3 of these bosses are fairly straightforward, fairly open for a lot of different champions that do not have to be like, you know, specific counters. OG Magneto, bring in OG Magneto here and you'll be fine. Like, he's metal champion, just get level 3, nuke him down. And yeah, that is about it. 7.32, it's a relatively easy quest, one of the easier ones overall, because there aren't many like really troublesome lanes aside from a couple of encounters, maybe like a Hit Monkey here and there or America Chavez. As long as you are aware and have a plan for anything that looks relatively menacing, should be fine. But there are a ton of champions that can be used on pretty much every lane. Right. That being said, that is it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about